Big Chungus, Big Chungus, Big Chungus, Big Chungus, Big Chungo, Big Chungus, 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 huge Chungus, Big 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 Chungus, Chug Chug, Big Chungus, Big Chungus, Big Chungus, huge Chungus, Big 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 Chungus,